Welcome back to the Decision 2024 from Valuetainment, where our own algorithm, VT Analytics, is analyzing the numbers in the election, and we're consuming all other polls, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the downright fraudulent, putting it all together for you. I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield. Let's dive into another week of data, but first, let's take a look at this week's headlines. After gaining RFK's backing, there is speculation that there is a position for RFK within Trump's cabinet as a health secretary. Is this something that is going to go through? We'll have to wait and see. We do know that this is a subject that he is very, very passionate about and somewhere he could make a very big difference. Trump also promises to release information pertaining to the JFK assassinations. We saw him announce this when they attended the Arizona rally together, their first appearance together as a duo since he decided to endorse Trump. And finally, coming out of the Democrat National Convention, it has been speculated that Kamala Harris has raised $450 million in total funds following that big event.
Well, either way you want to look at it, the headlines spell enthusiasm that was coming the other way. As the DNC concluded, suddenly we were there Friday with RFK and Trump together in Phoenix, fireworks, festivities, and a big change. It just shows you how much the change can come on a moment's notice in this most pivotal of races in our generation. We then go to the polls. So what are the polls saying about it? Rasmussen's daily poll is showing a squeeze here, because every now and then you'll see Rasmussen has a 10 spot on there, 10 percentage point shift among what has been a very nominal rate. And you can expect some of that volatility when you have things happening like they did on Friday. Nonetheless, Rasmussen is one of the few that are continuing to show tightness, but with Trump holding a consistent lead on a national basis. Now, we move on to crosstabs. And what did we find here, Amy?
When we take a look at this analysis brought to you by Rasmussen, we can see that Kennedy actually brings Trump a potential winning margin. When we dive into some of these numbers here, we can see the total percentage voters that were likely to give their vote to Kennedy, the independent candidate. And a lot of analysis has been done to determine who's really going to take up most of those votes. Is he going to take them away for Trump, or is he going to take them away from Kamala? And the general consensus is he's going to take them away from Trump, hence why he decided to drop out. So when we take into account these margins that Kennedy was likely to obtain, when we look at these crosstabs, it seems likely, once again, that he will bring that potential winning margin over to Trump.
We were seeing the following. VT Analytics, we unpacked as many of the polls as we have early this week to kind of see what was the Kennedy bias state by state. And so when we dove into there, we're finding crosstabs and information that suggests there is a 6-4 or 7-3 break for Trump in the RFK numbers, which means those people that thought that the RFK endorsement exclusively took from Democrats were not correct. We're seeing that there was actually states in which the Kennedy vote was actually 7-3 or 6-4, both times a little bit more from Trump. Now, in deep blue states like New York, it was more from Biden and then Harris, but it didn't matter in New York because they have a 15-point lead, the Democrats, over the Republicans. But it shows you how critical, strategic, and changing this is going to be with RFK endorsing Trump and campaigning together.
And so now let's dive into the key battleground states. What's really interesting is from a lot of these mainstream publications, there hasn't been any very fresh, very new polls since RFK has made his announcement to drop out and endorse Trump. However, what we can do is take a look at these key battleground states, take a look at the percentage that Kennedy was tracking at. For example, here in Wisconsin, he's tracking at 4.4% of the vote. And we can make our own deductions about how that may then impact the polls overall. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, when we take a look at these polls here, and we're not going to tell you where these are from, but these are examples of national average polls. And some of the national average polls are looking at polls that are as back as long as 3 and 4 weeks ago. The DNC and everything else is in there. And that's because that's all the polling data they have. So that's all the mainstream media has to work with. And if it fits with their narrative, they're going with it. And go with it they did. But when you take a look here, like in Pennsylvania, we see Pennsylvania with 1.5 points for Trump, before the RFK endorsement based on likely voter polls that show accurate crosstabs that don't lean Republican or lean Democrat by the nature of the number that's polled, like say 1,100 likely voters, then you find in there that it's a 6% Democrat bias. Well, that's all they had to work with. That's all they pulled. When you take the bias out and you put everything together, the poll may say Harris 3. All of a sudden you renormalize it for the Democrat bias, and it's really Trump 1.5. That's why when you take Kennedy out, we actually think that Pennsylvania is 2.5 to 3 points Trump at this hour. That's not our want. That's not our desire. That's what the numbers are saying when you break into them, normalize them out, and attempt to be objective.
So now it's time for our deep dive, and this is the final state that we're going to dive into within the blue wall, Michigan. First and foremost, let's take a look at Trump versus Biden and the size of relative victory going back to the 2020 elections. Now, we can see that once again, there's this really common theme where the Democrats really dominate in a lot of these urban centers, the big cities, Detroit, Lansing, Grand Rapids, for example. However, when you take a look at the rest of the rural or more of the suburban areas, we can see that that is where Trump was dominating. So if Kamala Harris wants to take Michigan once again, like they did in 2020, she's going to have to focus all of her campaigning efforts in those exact same centers.
So let's look at Michigan historically. Historically, it's been dark blue, 51, 51, 57, 54, convincing margin of victories, very convincing, until 2016. And take a look. For 16 years, that's 4 years each over 4 elections, the Republicans have been surging in Michigan, partly because Detroit has been sagging economically, and increasing numbers of people have been asking, what are we getting from the Democrat Party? That's what the polls show. That's not my opinion. That's what they're saying, and this is how they're voting. When the undecided vote was very broad, look at it. It absolutely did end Hillary Clinton's opportunity to continue the Democratic near tradition of winning Michigan. When that undecided vote or independent vote, undecided on main parties, choosing to be independent with Libertarian, Green, and what have you, narrowed up, she had just what she needed to defeat Trump, even though Trump pulled more voters in Michigan when he was running for re-election and lost than he got the year that he ran. So it shows you that Michigan hangs in the balance on the independent.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and take a deep dive now into the voters and issues within the state of Michigan. And this one is similar in a sense to Wisconsin in that they do not register by voter party. So it's even more crucial than ever to take a deep dive into the issues to see what really matters to the people of Michigan. Now, they do have a population of 10 million, and out of that, there's 8.39 million registered voters. So a large percentage of that population are registered to vote. And what do these voters care about? Well, as a trend that we've seen consistently through all of these deep dives, we can see that they care about inflation and the economy. This is up there as number one. And the major point of difference that we're seeing with this state compared to many others is that immigration doesn't rank up at number one like so many of the states that we've looked at prior. Once again, this comes back to the heat index of the issue. Yes, there are still immigration issues in Michigan. We've all heard the stories, the horror stories that have occurred. However, it's not on people's front lawn in the exact same way that it would be in Arizona, for example. And so immigration is not ranked up there as number one, but everybody is feeling the effects of this economy, Tom. When it comes to healthcare, this has also been a consistent theme. Really, healthcare is just another way of saying women's reproductive rights. They want the right to be able to get an abortion. This is a very highly contentious issue and also very important to the people of Michigan. And then finally, similar to Wisconsin, we also have the social justice and environmental issues as well. So now let's look at some of the most recent polls coming out of Michigan. Once again, we have included Kennedy's margin so we could also form our own conclusions. So Tom, what are we seeing here with the polls?
So what we're seeing here is a series of polls that you have to dive into the crosstabs to see. For instance, this is a likely voter poll, a registered voter poll. By definition, they're different because of the people that they are polling and that are in the composition that they're analyzing. In the likely voter poll taken between August 6th and 16th, it says you've got +7 Harris. in the registered voter poll, you have +1 Trump. And then if you just go back, take a look. These two polls almost overlap, the Fabrizio Ward impact poll, and it shows Trump +2. Basically, it shows you that, these two polls cannot both be perfectly correct. You can see the flaw in it when you see the overlap is within a day or two. How can these two things be here? And the answer is they're not. That's why we carefully dive into crosstabs to look to see what's there. What are we seeing? We're seeing Michigan with a very hard +3 for Kamala Harris right now. Now then, is that going to shift? Is that due to the convention? We're going to find out in a week. But right now, as it sits, looking at likely voters with a blend of registered voter status. And when I say that, remember, they don't register by party affiliation, but when you call them on the phone, they say, you may not be registered here in Michigan, but what party? Oh, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. They self-identify. That information will appear in the crosstabs to give us the ability to look at it, at least according to self-identification. Now then, when you take a look at these, what are we seeing? Like I said, we're seeing about a +3 Harris right now. When you take Kennedy out of Michigan, we're expecting a 6-4 split toward Trump. Does that narrow Michigan? Yes. Should that make the Harris camp sweat a little bit? Yes. But if the unions come out with the strength that they claim, Harris looks to be still holding a margin of about 1.5. That's how we see it, and we're anxious to see more polling where we can dive in even deeper.
And so now it's time for the Valuetainment Call. This is the culmination of all of the data you just saw before, plus our own aggregate through VT Analytics to give you our call 10 weeks from the election. Tom, what are we seeing for the Valuetainment Call?
Well, right now, we're still seeing a probability of 55%, but that's because we haven't been able to get our polling data, nor have we been able to get independent polls or get additional data since the weekend when RFK announced. We've only had now 3 days this week, and so there have been some flash polls, but we're looking for disciplined data, not just a flash poll. We're looking for true data so we can make the true call. That said, when we look at the splits here, we're still seeing 55%, and we're still seeing Pennsylvania going for Trump 2 points, and I think that's about to broaden to 2.5 to 3 points with the Kennedy fall off. So when you take a look at all of this, we are still at 276 and 55% Trump. However, Arizona only needs to move a tick for us to fully move it over, and that would be 287. So Trump is looking very secure, and that would give us about a 71%, 72% probability of him being elected. That's how we see it right now. But these next 2 weeks will be critical as people are responding to 4 things. First and foremost, the Kennedy endorsement. How are the independent voters splitting? Second, the bounce coming out of the convention. The Democrats stated what they're doing. There is energy, there is enthusiasm in the room, and you cannot deny that. Third, the Kamala Harris statement of principles and platform. She says, I stand for these principles, like I'm deeply principled on women's reproductive rights, but I'm platforming over here on these tax matters, and some of those didn't go over well. And then the fourth thing will be the increasing energy coming out of the Trump campaign in terms of their recent announcements this week that we have seen. There will be more events in more cities, maybe not as many super large stadiums, but there will be more events, and they are on the move. Those 4 things will be critical, and we want to see them unfold so that we can add to our analysis, which we believe is increasingly leaning toward a Trump victory. That's what the numbers are saying.
Join us next week for a deep dive into Arizona. Yes, we're going to travel back to Arizona because it's a very crucial swing state, and we want to see just how RFK dropping out, endorsing Trump, that incredible rally that they did in Arizona, we want to see how that affected the polls. Plus, was there a Kamala bounce coming out of the DNC convention? We're going to have some good data, hopefully, by next week. So all of that and more. And in the meantime, we're going to let the candidates do the talking because words talk, but numbers scream. I'm Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc, and you can find links on Minnect where you can ask us direct questions, along with some Minnects from some famous political leaders that I'm sure you're going to want opinions from as well.